Founders at Work, Stories of Startups' Early Days by Jessica Livingston. Picture this. It's 9:50 on a Tuesday morning at a crowded diner in Woodside, California. But this isn't your typical breakfast rush. A dozen TV cameras are crammed into the space, alongside journalists from the Wall Street Journal, all jostling for position. They're here to witness something that's never been done before. At the center of it all sits Max Levchin, a young programmer who looks like he might pass out at any moment. He hasn't slept in 5 days. Not because he's been partying or binge-watching shows, but because he and 2 other coders have been locked in a room, running on pure adrenaline, trying to write code that would make history. Their mission? Build a secure way to transfer money between Palm Pilots, those little handheld devices that were all the rage back then. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just a demo for the cameras. It had to actually work. Real money had to move. They finished the code exactly 1 hour ago, at 9 in the morning. Now the venture capitalists arrive. The cameras start rolling. Max holds up his Palm Pilot with a shaking hand. The investor holds up his. They point them at each other like they're about to duel with tiny infrared lightsabers. A small light flickers between the devices. Beep. Just like that, $4.5 million moves through thin air. The room explodes with excitement. As a reporter starts interviewing him, someone thoughtfully brings Max an omelet. Poor guy hasn't had a proper meal in days. He takes one look at that beautiful, steaming omelet, and, the next thing he knows, he's waking up with his face gently resting in it. The diner is empty. Everyone's gone. They just let him sleep there, face down in his breakfast. That moment, that utterly exhausted, slightly absurd, face-planted in an omelet moment, is how PayPal really began. You won't find this story in any business school textbook. Textbooks love to talk about market analysis, corporate structures, and 5-year plans, but they completely miss the most important part: the messy, human, often hilarious reality of what it's actually like when a world-changing company is just a few sleep-deprived people in a room, chasing an idea that sounds completely nuts to everyone else. That's exactly the world Jessica Livingston opens up for us in her remarkable book, Founders at Work. This isn't some dry business theory manual. It's a collection of raw, honest conversations with the people who actually lived through the chaos of building companies like Apple, Hotmail, Yahoo, and Adobe. Livingston set out to answer one simple question: what really happens in those first, fragile days of a startup? What she discovered is fascinating. These founders weren't superhuman geniuses with all the answers. Many of them were riddled with doubt. They stumbled into their ideas by accident. They got rejected, laughed at, and told repeatedly that their visions would never work. But they all shared something special. One quality that carried them through the uncertainty, the loneliness, and the constant fear of failure. By the time we're done today, you'll understand what that quality is. More importantly, you'll see that these tech titans were once just like you and me, driven not by some master plan, but by frustration, curiosity, and an unstoppable urge to build something meaningful. This isn't just about business. It's about what humans are capable of when they refuse to give up. When you think about how Apple Computer was born, you probably imagine 2 visionaries, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, huddled in a garage, carefully plotting a revolution. But the reality? Way messier and more interesting than that. Steve Wozniak, who everyone called Woz, was this brilliant but shy engineer working at Hewlett-Packard. He loved his job there. In fact, he planned to spend his entire career at HP, which he thought of as his work family. But here's the thing. After his day job ended, Woz couldn't stop tinkering. He was absolutely obsessed with designing computers. Ever since high school, he'd been sketching computer designs on paper, competing only with himself, trying to make machines that used fewer and fewer parts. The problem? He couldn't actually build any of them. Back then, a computer cost about as much as a house, so all he could do was design them in his head and on paper. Ironically, this constraint forced him to become one of the most clever electronics designers in the world. Then, something changed. A group of fellow computer nerds formed the Homebrew Computer Club, and Woz went to the first meeting. Suddenly, he realized microprocessors had finally gotten cheap enough. He could actually build the computer he'd been dreaming about his whole life. He wasn't thinking about starting a business or capturing a market. He just wanted to build something cool for himself and show it off to his friends. Every 2 weeks, he'd bring his creation, the Apple I, to these homebrew meetings. He even passed out photocopies of his designs for free, hoping other people would build their own versions. But most people didn't. Turns out, most of them were software guys who didn't know how to solder. That's where Steve Jobs enters the picture. Jobs saw something completely different. He looked at Woz's creation and saw a product. Look, Jobs told him, people want this, but they don't want to build it themselves. Why don't we make a printed circuit board, sell it for $40, and make it easy for them? Wozniak was skeptical. He figured maybe 50 people from the club would buy one. But Jobs said something that sealed the deal. Even if we don't get our money back, at least we'll have a company. For Woz, the idea of having a company with his best friend was appealing enough. So they started. Not with some grand vision to change the world, but with a modest plan to sell 50 circuit boards to hobbyists. This is one of the most surprising patterns in founders at work. So many world-changing ideas didn't begin with elaborate business plans. They started as side projects, hobbies, or solutions to personal annoyances. The founders weren't trying to build empires. They were just trying to scratch an itch. Take Hotmail. In the mid-90s, Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith were 2 engineers working at a startup, and they were frustrated because their company's firewall blocked their personal email. They had to exchange ideas by literally passing floppy disks back and forth. Super annoying. One day, it hit them. They could access any website through a web browser. So why couldn't they access email the same way? That was it. That was the killer idea. It didn't come from market research. It came from their own daily annoyance. They figured, if it solved their problem, it might solve other people's problems too. Or consider Flickr. Now it's a famous photo-sharing site, but it started as a feature inside a failing online game. Katarina Fake and her team were building this complex multiplayer game called Game Never Ending. As a side project, they built a little photo-sharing tool for the game's chat feature, but they quickly noticed something weird. People were way more interested in sharing photos than actually playing the game. The side project was crushing the main event. So they made a tough call. They put the game they'd started the company to build on hold and focused everything on the little photo-sharing tool that had emerged by accident. This pattern shows up again and again. The founders weren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They were just paying closer attention to the world around them, especially to their own frustrations. They weren't trying to predict the future. They were just trying to fix something broken in their present. Paul Buchheit, who created Gmail, had been tinkering with web-based email since 1996, long before Google. As a college student, he hated having to go back to his dorm room just to check email. That's so stupid, he thought. I should be able to check it anywhere. He built a prototype, but it never really went anywhere. Years later at Google, when he was asked to build some vague personalization product, he remembered that old frustration. In one day, using code from another project, he built the first version of Gmail. It wasn't some grand project handed down from executives. It was one person pursuing a long-held curiosity, seeing a need, and filling it. Here's the first big lesson from these founders. The most powerful ideas often don't feel like business ideas at all. They feel like solutions. They start small, born from genuine need. We think of startup founders as having superhuman confidence. But as Jessica Livingston discovered, many of them were incredibly unsure at first. What they weren't unsure about was their desire to make something good. Of course, having a good idea is one thing. Turning it into something real is completely different. And that path almost never goes in a straight line. Another powerful theme in the book is the pivot, that crucial moment when a startup has to abandon its original plan and head in a totally new direction. PayPal, for instance, didn't start as a way to send money online. Max Levchin was a cryptography expert, and the original idea he pursued with Peter Thiel was creating security software for handheld devices like Palm Pilots. They were convinced everyone in the corporate world would soon carry these devices and desperately need security for them. They raised money on this idea. They built the technology, but the market never materialized. As Max put it, they were like early Christians waiting for the second coming. It just wasn't happening. So they tried to pivot. Maybe instead of selling security libraries to other companies, they should build their own secure application. They created a digital wallet to store credit card numbers on your Palm Pilot. But again, nobody needed it. Why pull out your Palm Pilot when you could just look in your actual wallet? They were running out of ideas fast. Finally, they landed on something that seemed so weird and geeky it just might work. What if you could beam money between Palm Pilots? This was the idea that led to that famous diner moment. It got them attention and funding. But even that wasn't the final destination. After launching their Palm Pilot payment system, they created a simple demo website as an afterthought, just so people could manage their accounts online. But then, something strange happened. People started using the website to send money to each other. More and more users were coming from a site called eBay. These eBay sellers were practically begging to use their service. At first, the PayPal founders actually fought it. No, go away, they told them. We're a handheld device company. It took them a while to realize what was happening. Their users were telling them what their business should actually be. The demo website, the afterthought, was the real product. So they pivoted hard. They killed the handheld product and focused everything on becoming a web-based payment system for eBay sellers. The rest is history. Excite started as a database search company. Flickr started as an online game. The original idea almost never ends up being the one that succeeds. The founders who win aren't the ones with the most brilliant initial concept. They're the ones adaptable enough to listen to their users and flexible enough to change course when the original plan isn't working. They're guided not by rigid blueprints, but by deep empathy for the people they're trying to serve. They never lose sight of the most important rule: make something people want. But what happens when you build something people want and nobody believes you? What if the world just isn't ready for your idea? This brings us to one of the most surprising and inspiring lessons in Founders at Work. Nearly every one of these successful founders faced relentless rejection at first. When Dan Bricklin was a student at Harvard Business School in the late 70s, he had an idea that would genuinely change the world. He was sick of doing financial models on paper spreadsheets. Every time he made one tiny change, he had to erase and recalculate everything by hand. It was tedious and error-prone. Coming from a background in word processing, he thought, what if a spreadsheet could be like a word processor but for numbers? What if it could recalculate everything automatically? He built a prototype over a weekend on an Apple II. It worked. He and his co-founder, Bob Frankston, knew they had something revolutionary. They called it VisiCalc, the world's first electronic spreadsheet. But when they showed it to people, the reaction was often just confusion. Bricklin recalls that if you showed it to someone and the example wasn't from their specific field, they couldn't make the mental leap. They weren't programmers. They couldn't see how this general-purpose tool could solve their particular problem. Even computer people would shrug and say, that's kind of cool, but I could just write that in BASIC. The general public was even less impressed. They just assumed computers could already do that. What's so special? They'd ask. Web-based email, which seems so obvious now, was once dismissed as a dead end. When Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith were pitching Hotmail, they were so paranoid about being copied by a big company like Netscape that they didn't even put their real idea in the business plan. They pitched a different, less exciting idea for a web-based database. Only when they felt they could trust a venture capitalist would they reveal their killer arrow: free email, accessible through any web browser. Even Jerry Yang, the co-founder of Yahoo, told them he didn't think email belonged in a browser. He thought it was best done on a dedicated program. For the first 8 months after Hotmail launched, they had virtually no serious competition, partly because established players simply didn't see the potential. Innovations seem inevitable looking back, but in the moment, it's an uphill battle. Jessica Livingston quotes the computer pioneer Howard Aiken, who said something brilliant. "Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If your ideas are any good, you'll have to ram them down people's throats." This brings us to the single most important quality Livingston identified in all the founders she interviewed: perseverance. In a startup, nothing goes according to plan. Founders live day to day with uncertainty and isolation. They face constant rejection. The ones who succeed aren't necessarily the most brilliant or the best funded. They're simply the ones who refuse to quit. Nowhere is this more evident than in PayPal's fight for survival. Shortly after they pivoted to web payments, they ran into a problem that nearly destroyed the company: fraud. As soon as they made it easy to move money online, criminals from all over the world descended on them like locusts. They were hemorrhaging money every month. At its peak, PayPal was losing over $10 million a month to fraud. It was an avalanche of losses. The banking experts they'd consulted had warned them. "Fraud is going to eat you for lunch," they said. But the founders were young and naive. What fraud? They thought. Then it hit, and it was a full-blown crisis. This was the moment when most companies would have died. But Max Levchin became absolutely obsessed with the problem. He and an intern named Bob started digging into the data, trying to understand how the fraud was happening. It was a massive, complex puzzle. Criminals were creating networks of hundreds, even thousands of fake accounts to launder money. A human investigator trying to trace a single case would drown in printouts. So Max and his team built a tool. They called it Igor. It was software that could visualize money flowing through the system, identifying suspicious patterns invisible to human eyes. It combined brilliant software with human intuition. The software would flag the riskiest transactions, and human investigators would make the final call. It was a long, brutal fight. Levchin describes it as a year of just watching more and more money disappear. It was one of the lowest times in his life, filled with stress and internal company politics. But he didn't give up. He kept attacking the problem, and slowly, painfully, they started turning the tide. Their competitors, facing the same fraud problems, couldn't solve it. One competitor, eMoney Mail, shut down entirely, declaring that the internet just wasn't a safe place for transactions. Their fraud rate was 25%. For every $4 moving through their system, one was stolen. PayPal survived because they persevered. They were smart enough to recognize the gravity of the problem, and determined enough to invent a solution when none existed. Levchin says PayPal was really a security company pretending to be a financial services company. Their ability to manage risk was their true innovation. This theme of survival against impossible odds runs through so many of these stories. When Evan Williams and his team launched Blogger, it was a side project to their main product, a collaboration tool called Pyra. But Blogger, the simple tool for publishing to the web, took off. The company raised a small amount of money, but then the dot-com crash happened. The money evaporated. One by one, everyone left. The situation became so desperate that one day, Evan had to tell his entire team, who were also his friends, that they were all laid off. The next day, he was the only one who showed up at the office. The company was dead. He'd also just broken up with his girlfriend. It was, as he says, just the craziest bad time. He could have quit. Nobody would have blamed him. But Blogger was still running. It had users depending on it. So Evan stuck with it, alone. He taught himself how to keep the servers running. He lived off his savings. It was a period of intense struggle and public criticism. But he kept going. He launched a quote, server fund drive, simply asking users to donate money to buy more hardware. And they did. Slowly he rebuilt. 2 years later, with 1 million registered users, Google acquired Blogger. It was a triumph, born from absolute refusal to die. What becomes crystal clear as you read these stories is that building a company is less like following a map and more like navigating a storm. It requires a certain kind of person, someone who can find opportunity in chaos and who has an almost irrational belief in their ability to solve problems. Take Steve Wozniak's design for the Apple II. He wanted to add color graphics, sound, and game paddles, features that would make it perfect for games. But he also wanted to cut the number of chips in half compared to the Apple I, to make it cheaper and more reliable. How do you add all those new features while making the design simpler? The solution came to him late one night, after he'd been awake for 4 days straight, working on another project. As he describes it, when you get that tired, your head gets into this creative state where you think of ideas you'd normally just throw out as crazy. He came up with a wild idea for generating color TV signals using just one tiny, cheap part. He had no clue if it would work. But he built a prototype, and when he saw color appear on the screen for the first time, he said it was one of those eureka moments where you're shaking inside. He did it because he'd never designed anything like it before. He didn't know how other people solved it, so he had to invent his own way. As he says, all the best things I did at Apple came from two things: not having money and not having done it before, ever. This is the spirit of the hacker, the tinkerer, the true entrepreneur. It's a relentless desire to understand how things work and a belief that you can make them better. It's about seeing constraints not as limitations, but as catalysts for creativity. And it's about the unique bond that often forms between co-founders. Max Levchin says the reason PayPal succeeded was that he got incredibly lucky with his co-founder, Peter Thiel. They were very different people, but they shared this intense, competitive intelligence. He says the thing that kept us going in the early days was knowing that Peter and I would never be in a funk together. When one was down, the other could lift them up. Having a co-founder you can fundamentally rely on is perhaps the most critical element of all. As you journey through these stories, you start to see the human element behind the technology. You see the arguments, the moments of despair, the late-night breakthroughs, and the friendships that held everything together. You see that these companies weren't built by faceless corporations. They were built by people, often young, inexperienced, unsure people, who were driven by passion to create something new in the world. They show us that the heart of business isn't about spreadsheets and projections. It's about determination, creativity, and the courage to pursue an idea, even when the whole world is telling you you're wrong. What I find so powerful about Founders at Work is that it completely demystifies the act of creation. It takes these legendary figures off their pedestals and shows them as they truly were in the beginning: curious, frustrated, often broke, just trying to figure things out one day at a time. It's a profound reminder that every great enterprise, every world-changing technology, started as a tiny, fragile idea in someone's mind. The single most important lesson echoing through every story in this book is the power of determination. It's not about having the best idea, the most money, or the fanciest degree. It's about sheer stubborn will to keep going when things get hard. And things always get hard. The startup journey is a series of near-death experiences. The founders who succeed are the ones who can stare into the abyss of failure and say, "Not today." They have this almost irrational optimism, a belief that tomorrow will be better, even when all the evidence today suggests otherwise. The second key lesson is the importance of user empathy. The mantra that Paul Graham, one of the founders interviewed, now teaches at his startup school Y Combinator is beautifully simple: make something people want. It sounds obvious, but it's the rock where so many startups crash. The founders in this book who succeeded were obsessed with their users. They weren't building technology for technology's sake. They were solving human problems. They listened, they adapted, and they were willing to throw away their most cherished plans when users told them they were wrong. Finally, the book is a testament to the incredible power of constraint. Steve Wozniak's genius was forged in an environment where he had no money to build his designs. The founders of 37 Signals, who created Basecamp and Ruby on Rails, intentionally kept their team small and their resources limited because they knew constraints force simplicity and creativity. In a world that celebrates massive venture capital rounds and explosive growth, these stories remind us that sometimes the most valuable resource a startup can have is not having enough resources. It forces you to be clever, focused, and to build only what truly matters. So how can you apply these lessons to your own life right now? You don't have to quit your job or drop out of school to start thinking like a founder. First, start paying attention to your own frustrations. What are the small, annoying things in your daily life that you wish worked better? That's where the best ideas are hiding. Don't try to invent something for a market you don't understand. Solve a problem you have yourself. Second, build a tiny prototype. Don't write a 50-page business plan. Just build the simplest possible version of your idea that actually does something. Dan Bricklin built the first spreadsheet prototype in a weekend. The first version of Blogger was a simple script. The goal isn't to build a perfect, finished product. It's to build something you can show one other person. And that leads to the third step. Find one person who loves it. Don't worry about a million users. Don't worry about getting on magazine covers. Just find one other person who sees what you see, who gets as excited about your idea as you do. If you can do that, you have the seed of something real. These stories teach us that the journey of 1,000 miles really does begin with a single step. These founders weren't a different species. They were just people brave enough to take that first step and determined enough to keep walking, no matter how many times they stumbled. They remind us that the ability to change the world isn't reserved for a select few. It's a potential within anyone who has the courage to start small, the humility to listen, and the perseverance to see it through. That was a summary of Founders at Work, Stories of Startups' Early Days by Jessica Livingston. We've certainly touched on the big ideas today, but here's the truth. A summary can only ever be a map of the territory. The real treasure is found when you explore it yourself. The magic of this book is in the individual voices, the raw, unfiltered stories told in the founders' own words. This summary is meant to help you decide if this journey is for you. If anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity or lit a fire in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning business lessons. It's about connecting with the human spirit of creation, and that's an experience that can genuinely change how you see what's possible in your own life. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the ideas that shape great minds and great companies, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.